Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnameva Vashishyate Om Shanti Shanti Shantihi Yo Antaha Pravishya Mama Vacha Imam Prashuptam Sanjeevayati Akila Shaktidhara Swadamna Nyam Shtahasta Charana Shravanatvagādīn Prana Namo Bhagavate Purushaya Tubhyam Lasatu Srimadananda Tirthendurno Hridambare Yadvachaschandrika Swanta Santapam Vinikrantati Padavakya Pramana Jnan Pranamya Shirasa Gurun Vyakarishye Yatabhotam Vishnu Tattva Vinirnayam. So thank you everyone for joining. Good morning, good afternoon and good evening. So we are doing the 10th session of Isha Upanishad. Today is going to be a challenging session. Let me see how I go about doing this. So what were we doing? So we have done the nature of knower of Brahman. We have discussed what happens to the haters of Brahman. And over the last month and a half, we have been pretty much focused on thinking about the upasana of Brahman. How should Brahman to be contemplated? So that is what Svayambu Manu has described to us over the last several weeks with regards to what is the spirit in which we should do upasana of Brahman. Okay, so we did the last verse and we have done this last verse in some great depth over the last couple of weeks. Now, before I move to the next section, which talks about what are the consequences of wrong upasana. So this is very interesting. So not only knowing what is the right approach to Brahman is important, but also to be aware of what are the wrong approaches to the upasana of Brahman is also important, says Svayambu Manu. Kanva Rishi has seen these mantras, as you know. So that is also a very interesting aspect of Vedic philosophy, is not only to know what is right, but also to know what is not right. So there are two aspects, there are two sides of this coin called the correct knowledge. One is yathartha jnana, and the other side is to also know what is ayathartha jnana. That is what is false knowledge. That is also, it should be known. So only when you know what is wrong, you can be convinced about what is the right knowledge. Okay, so those are all the next sequence of verses, and you have 6 verses that talk about this. Now, what is important here is, before we go to the next verse that talks about this, is very important to recapitulate what is the last verse tell us about the upasana of Brahman. Saparyagad, Shukram, Akayam, Avranam, Asnaviram, Suddham, Apapaviddam, Kavir, Manishihi, Paribuhu, Swayambuhu, Yata Tatyato Artan, Vyadadat, Shashvatibhyaha, Samabhyaha. So this is the last verse on the upasana of Brahman, where Svayambu Manu has said this Paramatma has to be contemplated as Shukram, Akayam, Avranam, Asnaviram. He is the Kavi, he is the Manishi, he is the Paribuhu, he is the Svayambuhu. And finally, Svayambu Manu said, Yata Tatyato Artan Vyadadat Shashvatibhyaha Samabhyaha. Okay, so context is always very important when we actually look at the Upanishads and try to learn the Upanishads. So in this context of the upasana of Brahman, or the contemplation of Brahman, Svayambhu Manu has used creatorship of the Supreme as a very important upasana of Brahman. So that is what is Svayambhu Manu's view here, is after having described the great gunas or qualities of Brahman, he finishes off with the creatorship of Brahman. And he says this understanding of the creatorship of the Supreme Brahman is an important upasana. Okay, so that is where we are going to be discussing for the rest of this class. Let's try and make it interactive. It's a little bit of a complex concept, as you will find out. Okay, so now the key idea is to understand the creatorship of the Supreme. Okay, the key point is For such a contemplation, should Brahman's creation be considered real or unreal? Okay. What is the Svayambu Manu's view on this fundamental topic? Yeah, so this is what we were doing last week, and we kind of reviewed a number of Vedic evidence from the Upanishads, Rig Veda, Bhagavatam, Gita, Vyasa Smriti, Varaha Purana, and so on. And I also told you that every verse, every word in this 8th mantra of Isha Upanishad actually has got an explanation in Varaha Purana. So we have to look at the evidence within the scriptures to describe what it means. That's what I told you last time. So when he says Yata Tatyato Vartan Vedadat Shashvatibhyaha Samabhyaha, Yata Tatyata, Yata Tata. Okay. So essentially means in its full and proper sense, really and truly, and not as an illusion, or these things called the Arthan. We looked at Rig Veda, Surya Chandramaso Data Yata Purvama Kalpayat. Yat Idanim Tat Agre Cha Paschad Api Etad Idrisham Bhagavatam. Urdvamulam Adahashakam Ashwattam Prahur Avyayam. Gita chapter 15. Vishwam Satyam Vashe Vishnoho Nityameva Pravahataha Vyasa Smriti. Varaha Purana Sasatyam Jagat Etad Drik Nityameva Pravahataha. So when you look at all these verses, everywhere in the scriptures, you are seeing these statements that seems to endorse Svayambu Manu's view with regards to the upasana of Brahman as the creator of the universe, and that his creation is yatartha, his creation is real. What we see outside is real, is what Svayambu Manu is telling us. Okay, so let's kind of hold our thoughts there for a few minutes and then think about this. Last week, Harish T was bringing up interesting concepts in Srimad Bhagavatam. So we said, let's pick up Srimad Bhagavatam and then move on and understand what is it that Srimad Bhagavatam says. So here I have a very, very quick quiz to wake us all up. Who wrote Bhagavatam and Brahma Sutra? Quick answer. Rapid fire question. Who composed Bhagavatam and Brahma Sutra?
Veda Vyasa.
Krishna Dvaipayana. Veda Vyasa.
Okay, excellent, very good. So Veda Vyasa, Krishna Dvaipayana or Badarayana. Okay, fantastic. Now the next question. Who is this Veda Vyasa? Is he some random Rishi in the Himalayas, or is he somebody else? Very enthusiastic answer. So can I get one answer? Everybody said simultaneously. So who is Veda Vyasa?
Mahavishnu's avatar.
Wonderful, Sudarshan. Thank you so much. So that Mahavishnu's avatar who composed Bhagavatam and Brahma Sutra, he put the second sutra as Janmadhyasya Yataha. Okay, that this Brahman is the creator of the universe. So now let us take Harish's Srimad Bhagavatam. Harish, do you want to recite this first verse, Harish?
I'm actually driving, so...
No worries. Okay, no worries. I'll do that for you. So, Janmadhyasya yato anvayad idaratashta arteshva abhignaha swarat tene brahma hrudayadi kavaye muhyanti yatsurayaha tejo vari mrudam yata vinimayo yatra trisargo mrusha damna svena sada nirasta kuhakam satyam param dhimahi. The very first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam essentially summarizes the whole of Vedic philosophy. And that is the genius of Veda Vyasa. And that is why he is Sarvagnya. He is a Sarvagnya Muni. And that Sarvagnya is Vishnu himself. So very, very quick run through this, this particular verse of Srimad Bhagavatam to understand how that links up with the 8th verse of Isha Upanishad. So Veda Vyasa in the second sutra said Janmadhyasya Yataha. And in the Bhagavatam very first verse, he puts exactly the same words. Janmadhyasya yato. Okay. Very clear. So the Janmadhyasya yato can be split in two ways. Janmadi asya yataha. That is from whom this world has come forth. Or Janma adyasya yataha. Adya is Chaturmukha, the very first being who came in creation. Adyasya Yataha, from whom Chaturmukha Brahma came. So that is also Janmadyasya Yataha is one way of looking at it. And this particular figure is very, very, we are very familiar with this, where Chaturmukha Brahma comes out from Vishnu. Ajasya Nabhav Avadyekam Arpitam. That is the Vishwakarma Shukla of Rig Veda, which tells us how Chaturmukha comes. Janma Adyasya Yataha. But primarily, Janmadi Asya Yataha Janmadyasya Yato. Okay, so we know a number of verses that talk about this creatorship of Brahman. Yato va imani bhutani jayanti, yena jatani jivanti, yat prayanti, abhisamvishanti, tad vijijnasasvat, tad brahmeti. I've just picked one. So next Veda Vyasa says, how to know that creator is the next question. Okay, this guy is the creator of the universe. How to know that creator? Anvayad itaratashcha arteshu. Arteshu means the created objects of the universe. And how to know that creator? You know that creator through Anvayat and Itarataha. What is Anvayat? Tattu Samanvayat. That is the sutra that Veda Vyasa has put. Tattu Samanvayat is the Anvayat here. Tattu Samanvayat means when you look at Shastra, when you look at all the Shastras, you have to do Samanvaya. You have to do deep grammatical, Vyakarana, Nirukta, rules of interpretation, Prakarana, etc. And then do a careful study of the Shastra and understand that Vedaishta Sarvair Ahameva Vedyaha, that the whole of the Vedas only talk about this Paramatma. Now, Itarataha means there are also other means of knowledge by which you can know Brahman. So besides scripture, you have Pratyaksha, you have Anumana also. Pratyaksha with our material eyes, we can't see him, but with inference, with logic, although you can not directly understand the Paramatma, with logic, you can also have a rational contemplation that gives us a glimpse of this Paramatma. Why? As Dwadasha Stotra says, Bahuchitra Jagat Bahuda Karanat Parashaktihi Ananta Gunaha Paramaha. So that is Itarataha, logic. And also we can contemplate this beautiful universe, this wonderful universe is so intricate. So how wonderful must be its creator? Okay. So that is what Vyasa is saying in the Srimad Bhagavatam. Then next what he puts, this Arteshu, all things in the universe, if somebody has to create, then he must be Abhignaha and he must be Swarat. Abhignaha, Nya means knowledge. Abhignya means Abhitaha knowledge. It's like Sarvagna, omniscience. That is what Abhignaha means. So that person who creates the universe must be Sarvagnya. That is what our Svayambu Manu has said, Kavihi. And that person who creates, he must also be a Swarat. Swa means what? Swatantra. Swatantro Bhagavan Vishnuhu. Okay. So he must be an independent being who is not dependent on anybody, but he has infinite knowledge, Ichcha Shakti, Kriya Shakti, etc., that he is able to create the universe. So, Abhignaha and Swarat. And what kind of creation does he create? Tejo Vari Mrudam Yeti Yata Vinimaya. So this is interesting. Just a rapid run through this because we can spend the whole 1 hour talking about this. 3. Here Vyasa is saying there are 3 aspects, 3 concepts of creation. 1, if the Paramatma has to create, or if we need to create anything, we need Ichcha Shakti, Jnana Shakti and Kriya Shakti, and Paramatma has got all this in infinite times infinity. And this creation should happen with 3 gunas that are available in Mula Prakriti, Sattva, Rajas and Tamas. So these 3 needs to be mixed up and then the creation comes about. And also, Tejo Vari Mruda means, Teja means heat, Vari means water, Mruda means mud. So these are the manifested forms of the Panchabhutas. The forms of the Panchabhutas that we can actually see are Tejas, Vari and Mrudam. So these mix up and then they form lots of gross things in the universe. And this is important because this is again is the genius of Vyasa, because he directly takes us to Chandogya Upanishad chapter 6, where if you can recall what we discussed at that point, we discussed Trivrit Karana, Nama Rupa Vyakarana, Trivrit Karana. tad aikshasa bahusyam prajayeti, tad tejo ashridacha, tad apo asrujata, annam asrujanta. And then the Upanishad, Uddalaka, the same Uddalaka now talks about how these three are mixed up. So the Tejas, Vari and Mrudam of Bhagavatam is the same Tejas, Aap and Annam. Mruda is Annam, Pinda, Anna. Vari, Aap, water. Tejas, Tejas. Okay. So that opens up a whole school of philosophy. Go and read up that section on chapter 6, where Rudra, Vayu, Chaturmukha, Lakshmi, they are all involved in creation and they are all under the control of the Paramatma, who is Uttama Purushaha. Lakshmi is Kutastha Aksharaha, whereas everybody else starting from Chaturmukha Brahma is a Kshara. Okay, so that is another view of Tejo Vari Mrudam. Okay, and also the Tejo Vari Mrudam is three types of creations that all these three folks do. Paramatma comes down in his Vyuha forms, Avatara forms, etc. So that is Paramatma's creations. Jiva Srishti is Jiva's linked to gross material body, and we've had endless discussion about this. And Jada Srishti is the Mula Prakriti mixing up with each other. You have the 24 Tattvas, then you have the Brahmanda, and the Brahmanda, Panchabhutas, and all the objects of the material universe. Okay, so these are all being created. And then, of course, Veda Vyasa puts a very, very important same statement. What is this? Damna Svena Sada Nirasta Kuhakam Satyam. Nirasta means no. This Tejo Vari Mrudam Yata Vinimayo, this creation that Vyasa is talking about, he concludes in the last line by saying, this is not Nirasta. This is not a Kuhaka. No, it is not an illusion, is the literal meaning of that Nirasta Kuhakam, but it is Satyam. Okay. So, Satyam, so such a being we worship. Satyam Param Dhimahi. Okay, so that is the first verse of Srimad Bhagavatam. So Vyasa's views is clear. Svayambu and Manu's view is very clear. He said, Yata Tatyato Artan Vedadat Swashvatibhyaha Samabhyaha Janmadyasya Yataha Nirasta Kuhakam. There are so many of these verses in the Upanishads and Vedas, but yet some view the world as illusion and unreal. Okay? That view is still out there, right? And it is quite all pervasive. It is around. So how do you square this circle? Why is this important? Because the next verse, as I said, the next set of 6 verses asks us that if we do the upasanas, we need to know what is true knowledge, what is wrong knowledge, and so on. So this discrimination needs to happen. So what I have done is, for this class, spend the next 40-45 minutes to understand, to just get the basics. Yeah. So this is too big a topic. This probably will take 3 to 6 months to cover in all its aspects. That is not my intention. The intention is to give you a flavor of how to approach this. Okay. So the question there is, what are the ontological status of the universe in Indian schools of philosophy? Okay. So we know that in Indian schools of philosophy, there are Shad Darshanas. So who wants to tell us the Shad Darshanas? If the figure is already here, anybody wants to remind us what are the 6 schools of Indian philosophy?
Sorry, you already got it, man.
Yeah, I already got it. So I just wanted somebody to say this, but no worries.
Sankhya, Nyaya, Purva Mimamsa, Yoga, Vaiseshika, Vedanta.
Okay, thank you, Sudarshan. So the way you combine this is you say Sankhya Yoga in one combination, Nyaya Vaiseshika in one combination, and Purva Mimamsa and Uttara Mimamsa or Vedanta is in one combination. So these are the 6 schools of Indian philosophy. Okay, and of course in the Vedanta there are 3 sub-branches that have evolved over the last 1600 years: Visishtadvaita, Tattvavada or Dvaita, and then Advaita. Okay, so these are all the schools that come from, that get inspiration from the Vedas. So they are called Astika schools. And there are other schools that have grown and flourished in the Indian civilization that have rejected the Vedas, that do not accept Vedas as a source, authoritative source of scripture. So those schools are Jainism, Arhata, Buddhism, Tathagata. Okay, so there is a difference. And then you have the materialist called the Charvakas. No, no. Why have I gone through all this? Because you will be interested to know that all these schools of philosophy, and again, you can spend a lifetime to read about this. I would recommend 6 volumes by a great philosopher called Surendranath Dasgupta. History of Indian Philosophies, 6 volumes. Buy it from Amazon, read through it. It is good bedtime reading, but it can take months. But that discusses all the various philosophies, Indian philosophies. Why have I said this? Because all these philosophies have a different view, ontological status of the universe. Is it real or is it not real? So, Sankhya, Yoga, Nyaya, Vaisheshika, Purva Mimamsa, and within Vedanta, Visishtadvaita and Tattvavada, they all consider the world as real. Okay? We will talk about what is the criteria of reality next, but we just need to understand that the majority of the schools of philosophy, majority of the Indian schools of philosophy have approached this problem from the perspective of world being real. Okay? Among the Nastika schools, Jainism or Arhata Mata also considers the world as real. The materialists, the Charvakas, also consider the world as real. Otherwise, they won't be going to the cinemas and pubs and having a good time. So the Charvakas also consider the world very much real. Okay? But there are only 2 schools of Indian thoughts that consider the world as not real. Okay? One comes from the Vedanta school and it is called Advaita. And we all know it as Advaita, but classically it's called Mayavada. Okay? But in the English jargon, you could say monism. So Mayavada is the classical definition of Advaita, but recently it's called Advaita. But monism is also Advaita. There is one Nastika school that also considers the world as unreal, which is Buddhism. Everything is an illusion and kshanika, that is Buddhism. There is a Western school of philosophy, I've just put this here for our interest, called Solipsism. Solipsism. That also considers the world as an illusion. So Buddhism and Solipsism consider the world as an illusion. Mayavada has got a slightly different twist to it and says it is mithya or unreal. So there is something called illusion and there is something called unreal. So we need to grasp these concepts. Okay. Now, this is not unique to Indian philosophy. Even in Western philosophy, there is the same division, realism and idealism. And I've just listed a couple of famous philosophers that you might have heard of, Plato and Aristotle, or realistic philosophers. Berkeley, Immanuel Kant, they are idealistic philosophers. Yeah, they are all very famous philosophers in the Western world, as you know. So, but then you have in the Indian system, you have the majority of them having the realistic view, and there is one school within the Vedic darshana or Shad darshana that thinks the world as unreal. What have they said in their Brahma Jnana Valimala? Brahma Satyam Jagan Mithya Jivo Brahmaiva Na Aparaha. Okay, so that is the monistic philosophy of Jagat Mithya. So that is very unique to the Maya school, the Mayavada school. Okay? So now here is the problem for us in Isha Upanishad, because in this forum, we have always had very comparative analysis to get to the bottom of the truth, and we understand the truth based on our own capacities. So what does our Svayambu Manu has said? This artha, this world is yata tatyataha. Whereas the Mayavada has said, this world is mithya. Okay. So for Svayambu Manu's perspective, we have just seen these verses, Janmadhyasya Yataha Nirasta Kuhakam from Srimad Bhagavatam, from Brahma Sutra, and I've also recited this particular verse empty number of times. From the Mayavada school, I've just taken, again, we are not going through an exhaustive discussion. I'm happy to do that at some point. I made some 150 slides on this at some few years ago. So this particular concepts of Mayavada is, they have taken 3 examples, 3 illustrations to show why the world is mithya. Okay? One is the concepts of superimposition, as how a snake is superimposed on this rope, Or how a silver is superimposed on a conch shell, similarly, the world is superimposed on Brahman, but actually does not have a reality of its own. So that is the ideas of superimposition, which is technically called Vivartavada or Adhyasa. Yeah, Adhyasa or Vivarta. So check this out. Then there is another example of dreams. So Mayavada takes, see, like dream is an illusion, you get dreams. Similarly, this creation is a dream of Brahman. It is just a dream. Okay? Those are the three examples. And I am hoping to just handle these three examples today just for our interest. So these are the two contradictory views. Although the majority of Indian system of thought considers the world as a real thing, a tangible thing, there is a school that's very popular that considers the world as not real, unreal. Okay, so I am scratching my head as to how do we understand what Svayambu or Manu is saying, because the next 6 sets of verses is very important, because we need to know what is true knowledge, what is false knowledge. We need to have the discriminative power, because after all, this is our journey as souls. And if I take the wrong path, I am doomed. I just need to be very clear that I take the right path and make my journey to salvation. So we have to go back to the basics. What is real? What is an illusion? What is unreal? Okay, so we need to understand this. And that is what is the beauty of Indian philosophical system or Vedic philosophy, where it asks you to think about these problems yourself and then arrive at a conclusion. What we certainly should not be doing is take these concepts as dogmatic truths and then just become blind followers. That certainly is not the Vedic approach. Yeah. So I'm just opening it up for a minute as to what is our understanding of what real means, what is an illusion means, what is an unreal means. 1 minute for discussion. Anybody has got any views on this?
Namaskara, sir.
Yeah. Please.
Only my this is my way of thinking. On a relative basis, maybe Shankaracharya might have told this is mithya. That is my observation. That's all.
Okay, thank you very much. So let's go to the next slide so that okay, so I put a very basic slide here. What are the criteria of reality and illusion? Okay, so I'm sorry if this comes across as hardcore philosophy, but this is Vedic philosophy. Philosophy and spirituality and religion, they're all mixed. And that is what is called Vedic philosophy. We have not separated philosophy from spirituality. They are intertwined with each other. And that's why our philosophy, our Sanatana Dharma is very rich. So what are the criteria of reality? Okay. So let us think about this problem. So there is the external world. There are all these sensory inputs that are coming in. Then our sense organs are sort of capturing these inputs from the external world. They are going through various nerve endings and getting into the brain, and they're going into various areas of the brain. And then you have this component called the mind, which has got 5 components, our Shastra say, that processes all this information, and then it presents it to somebody. Okay, so that is the first question there. Who gets knowledge or experience of the external world? That is a basic question. Who gets knowledge of the external world? Anybody wants to contribute here? Who gets the knowledge of the experience world? Does the mind get the knowledge of the experience world? Or the intellect, which is also a component of the mind, gets the knowledge of the external world? Or is it something else?
I would have thought mind gets the knowledge of the external world, because if you are when you're asleep, then no sensory input, like apart from the very basic things actually. So
okay, thank you, Sudarshan. Anybody has got a different view here?
Madhu Suresh,
Yeah.
I thought Antaryamin is the reason why we get the knowledge of the outside world. Yeah, because the Jiva has, without the Antaryamin, Jiva is not there. So even though Jiva perceives all these things, if Antaryamin is not there, he doesn't work. So it must be Antaryamin, Paramatma.
Thank you, Shilaji. Suresh?
my understanding would be that it's the Jiva who gets the knowledge. the mind or the intellect are insentient. They're not, I mean, they're not capable of, they are tools, but they're not, they don't have the self-initiated, or they don't have the, then they're basically non-living, so to say. Therefore, I would say Jiva is the one who through intellect or mind gets the knowledge.
Thank you, Sureshji.
Non-help.
Please, yeah.
I feel it is Jnanendriyas. 5 Jnanendriyas are the thing.
Okay. Thank you, Shobhaji. And we've also had an answer from Neetaji, who is sitting in Badrinath, and then she is putting the answer. So thank you so much, Neetaji, for joining us today from Holy Badrinath. And please do our namaskarams on all our behalf to Sriman Narayana there. And Neetaji says it is the Sakshi, that is the witness of knowledge, the Sakshi or the witness who is the perceiver of knowledge. Okay, so beautiful answers today. So essentially what we need to understand is a non-living thing is a jada, is not capable of perceiving knowledge or about itself. A stone does not get knowledge, and the stone does not get the knowledge of the external world or about its own existence. So Sudarshan, from that perspective, if you dig down deeper and deeper from the brain and so on, there is one view saying that the mind is also it is not a sentient being. Mind is also a non-sentient component of the brain complex. So when you look at it that way, mind will be processing the information, but there must be somebody else who actually becomes aware of something. That awareness is knowledge, right? So that is one view. So think about this problem. So this is a fundamental problem because there is a division here itself as to who gets knowledge. Okay. Some school think that the soul or Antaryaman, as Sheilaji was mentioning, does not get any knowledge. It is the mind that is always getting the knowledge of the external world. And there are other schools which say, but the mind is a non-living thing. It is a jada. Rachana anupapatteshta na anumanam om. Remember that Sutra Veda Vyasa has said, where he clearly said, only a sentient being is capable of self-initiated action. By implication, it is only the self. It is only a conscious being which is also capable of receiving knowledge. Okay, think about that problem. So, assuming for the moment now that
Namaskar, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, do you mind recap the question and recap the answer, please, once more?
Yeah, yeah, sure, definitely I'll do that. Please introduce yourself, RK. I don't know whether
Namaskar, sir. Krishna Raj.
Oh, Krishna Raj. Yes, hello, Krishna Raj. Yeah, thanks for joining. So the question was, who gets knowledge? Okay, is it the brain that gets the knowledge of the external world, or is it the mind that gets the knowledge of the external world, or is it the soul that gets the knowledge of the external world through the processing by the brain and the mind? Yeah. So the one view there is it is the soul that gets the knowledge. Okay. Now the next question is, Sheilaji is right. The soul's capacity to get knowledge, it cannot gain knowledge independently because it is dependent on the Antaryamin who is inside it. That Antaryamin has allowed the soul to get the knowledge. So from that perspective, that is also true. But of course, the Antaryamin is Sarvajna. He is the one who gets knowledge of everything in the universe simultaneously. But we as souls, we get the knowledge in our very narrow purview of what we are seeing at this point of time. Those are all the differences, but it is the sentient being that gets the knowledge. So that's the first point. So the next one is, what is true knowledge then? True knowledge is defined as yatartham pramanam. So determination of things as they are in themselves is true knowledge. So if there is a rose and I perceive the rose and I get the knowledge of the rose and the rose is actually out there, then that knowledge is yatartham. So, yatartham pramanam. So these are all some basic ideas. Think about it. Okay. So the reason why this is important is experience. Our experience of what's happening in the external world is directly dependent on our perceptions, right? We perceive the external world and we experience it. Okay. It is based on our experience is only when we start philosophizing. So experience should always be the foundation of all philosophies. Okay, this is again a point that I wanted to emphasize and think about it. If we dismiss experience itself as an illusion, then you really can't have any philosophy, or we cannot have any purposeful philosophizing or discussion. Yeah, experience should be the foundation. What is that experience? We are suffering in this world. So that suffering is an experience. And then we ask the question, why am I suffering? Because that suffering is there. And then you make the philosophical journey. Okay? So that is how you view this. So true knowledge always means prama, whereas false knowledge is called brahma. Okay, so the criteria of reality is only 3. If you can remember these 3, then the whole of philosophy is done. What are the criteria of reality? The first criteria of reality is that it is unsublated. So that is a complex word, but in Sanskrit it's called abadhya. Abadhyam satyam. Yes, Prakash ji, yes. You have a question?
I have a question.
Yeah.
See, I'm sorry, it may be a little bit, I may take 1 minute if you don't mind. So now we believe in transmigration. We get different bodies. As a human bodies, we see, for example, light. Let's just take the concept of light. I visualize something. In another janma, I become dog. They say that dog's vision is not equal to human's vision. Then like that, if you take a bat, his sound is different. Our sound decibel, what we are listening sound. So like that, if you take, what is the reality?
Okay.
And
Very
what
good.
is the jiva? So I want to go in that direction and see whether our sakshi or the jiva, whatever we call that soul, that experience of the outside thing, how it is confirming it to be real. And it is, since it is a spirit material, it is not material thing. How does it relate to this material experience, which is a very complicated thing according to me? Please explain on that lines if you can.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, maybe 30 seconds for that. So Prakash ji, when we talk about indriyas, yeah, jnanendriya, Shobha ji was mentioning about jnanendriya. There are two classifications in philosophies, indriyas. One is called eternal indriyas or swarupa indriyas, and the other one are the indriyas that we carry in our gross body in the linga sharira, primarily in the linga sharira where all these are there. And our gurus tell us that all the eyes, nose, and ears are just magnifying glasses that bring the inputs. So you have the linga sharira where the material indriyas are, whereas the jiva swarupa itself has its own indriyas, non-material indriyas, which is in fact is called the sakshi. So you have the non-material eternal indriyas, as I put here, that is the jiva swarupa itself. Then you have the non-eternal indriyas, which are made up of matter. So when this soul is in this cage covered by the gross matter, the information that it receives is limited by its outer covering. The outer covering only can send its information, and that is what it perceives. So in this janma as a human being, for example, my faculties are much more refined. My brain, my brain-mind complex, my intellect, they're all much more evolved, and I am feeding a particular sensory input to my swarupa indriya, and I get a particular knowledge. Whereas if I am a dog, my external faculties are different from the faculties of a human being. So the information that comes from the external world is only processed based on the material body that the dog has, and that conveys the information to the soul, and the soul then gets and says, I am aware of this knowledge. Okay, so the soul, yes, is a perceiver of knowledge, and it's the knowledge that it perceives when it is transmigrating. The quality of the knowledge is dependent and based on the external coverings of the body. Okay, so I think we should move on in here. So
Madhu, sorry, just quickly, can I just say the same thing? Right? This lecture we are listening now, and if a dog listens to this lecture, sitting next to me, it's not going to take any substance into that. And the same way is another human being listens, but imagine he has had a brain injury, and so he's just watching it. That's all. Somebody with learning difficulties. He's got everything, much better than the dogs, but he cannot process it. He cannot understand it. Somebody with dementia or something. So in that sense, it's the same. Like, even though he's got the ability and everything, sitting and watching, it's just completely watching. It's like as if like I'm sleeping and watching this this lecture.
Yeah. Thank you, Sudarshan. And then there is also another concept called Swarupa Yogyata. So each soul is different. Each soul's capacity to receive knowledge, process knowledge also is different, and that also entails that also determines what kind of knowledge that we can have. Okay, so we will move on. So the primary criteria of reality is abhadyam satyam. That means that which is not sublated is real. So I'll have to spend a few minutes to kind of enforce this idea. So I'm getting a bit worried whether I'll complete this slide set or not. Anyway, let's see what happens. So what does unsublation means? Unsublation or abhadya means what? If there is a rose in the garden, I see the rose and the rose is actually there, and that knowledge of the rose that I've got is never going to be sublated by a subsequent knowledge that this is not a rose, because the rose is actually there in the garden. So that knowledge that I had of the rose, for example, I'm sitting in my formal room and I'm looking through the rose and I get the knowledge of the rose. And then I go to the garden and I see the rose and still it is the rose. So the prior knowledge of the rose is not sublated by the subsequent knowledge of the rose. It is not. It is the same knowledge of the rose that I have. So that abhadyam satyam is a primary criteria of reality. Okay, you have to think about this. Similarly, if there is a rope outside and I see the rope, and I go near it, and still it is the rope, then that knowledge of the rope is true knowledge and it is not sublated. Suppose if there is a snake in the garden, and I'm seeing the snake from my formal room, and I go near and then I confirm that this is a snake, that is also true knowledge, because the prior knowledge of the snake has not been sublated by anything else. It is still the same snake that is there. So that is the criteria of reality. But on the other hand, I'm walking in a road. The street lamps are not there. It is like Amavasi. The light is not there. I've got a bit of a cataract. I'm not able to see things properly, and my eyes are not getting proper sensory contact with the rope. But then I somehow perceive this rope as a snake. So I get a prior knowledge that this is a snake. But then what I do is I take a torchlight, I go close by and put the light on, and then it turns out to be a rope. So I get a subsequent knowledge that this is a rope. So what has happened in this situation is a prior knowledge of a snake has been sublated by a subsequent knowledge of a rope. Okay, so in this instant, there is bhadya. There is what is called sublation that has happened. So that is called Brahma or an illusion. So these are basic fundamentals that we need to keep thinking about. And this is how Indian philosophy or Vedic philosophy or Vedantic philosophy actually progresses. So hold on to that idea. The second criteria of reality is existence in space and time. Okay, this is important. So that rose exists in my garden this afternoon. It has got a space-time correlation. All philosophers agree this. Similarly is the rope. Similarly is the snake. So here is a question for us to think about. In this equation, when I am walking on the streets, there is no light, it's Amavasya, I've got cataract and I'm seeing something and I'm seeing it as a snake. Okay. So in that equation, I've got a question. Does the snake exist in space-time in that situation when I perceived a snake? So who is going to answer that?
It does not exist.
Thank you very much, Suresh and Sudarshan. Anybody has a different view? Does it actually exist, the snake? It does not, because there is no space-time correlation. In that space, in that time, there was actually not a snake. Okay, so the snake did not exist in a space-time correlation. What actually existed was the rope that existed in the space-time correlation. So because there was no space-time correlation, this experience is Brahma. This experience is an illusion. We get a similar experience for mirage, isn't it? If you go in the desert, you might see some lake, but actually it is not a lake. It is only the desert. So snake is an illusion and it is a Brahma, whereas the rope is a Prama. Okay. So once the later perception of the rope happens, then you may go and check it 1,000,000 times, put a torchlight, touch with your finger, smell it, tie it around your neck, do whatever you want with the rope, but still the rope is the rope. That knowledge of the rope is never sublated. So it has a reality. So this is how our Vedic philosophers think about reality. Okay, there is Prama, there is Brahma. Two components of all of existence, reality and illusion. Sat, Asat. That is how the ideas progress. What is Sat? What is Asat? Okay, so hope this made sense. Let's go to the next one. Now let us look at our philosophical concepts. Does that mean our Brahman is real? If you put this in the equation, you have to put space and time, isn't it? Brahman exists in infinite space and Brahman exists in infinite time. So Brahman has space-time correlation, so he is real. Okay. Let us look at this picture in this equation. There is Shri Tattva or Lakshmi, the Abhimani of Mula Prakriti. She is as pervasive as Paramatma in space and time. But in Guna, she is not, but in space and time, she is all pervasive. So Shri Tattva is real. If you put space-time equation, look at Mula Prakriti, the primordial matter. Every time there is a Big Bang, it becomes gross matter. Then again, it becomes primordial matter. Yeah, the primordial matter is always there in space and time. Okay? Primordial matter is also real. Look at Ksharas, Jivas. What is the Jiva's position? We are infinite in time, but we are finite in space. Nevertheless, we have a space-time correlation. Therefore, we are real. Okay. Look at all the material, gross material objects like the rose, the rope, the rose, the rope, the snake, the pot that are all there. They are all there in space and time. They are real, but there is a difference. What is the difference? Jiva and Paramatma, Kutasthakshara, they are all eternal. Okay. They are Nitya, but they are real. Whereas the rope, the snake, the flower and the pot are anitya. They are non-eternal because the rose will eventually fall down. The rope may destroy. The snake may shed its skin and move on. Somebody may drop the pot and the pot may break down. But when it existed, it had a space-time correlation. So it is real. Okay? So non-eternal, anitya and real. So one of the Vedantic views is everything in the universe is real because it has a space-time correlation. Some may be nitya, some may be anitya. And also, there may be one that is an independent reality, but there are lots of things that are dependent realities. If you look at Shvetashvatara Upanishad, what does it say? Nya, Agnyau, Dvav, Anishav, Shara, Atmanau, Ishate, Deva, Yekaha. So there is this Brahman who is an independent reality, whereas all others are dependent realities. Exactly what Tattva Sankhya tells us. Swatantram, Aswatantram cha dvividam tattvamishyase swatantro Bhagavan Vishnu. Okay, so these are some basic ideas of Sat and Asad. What is reality and what is an illusion? And you will be pleased, I hope, that in Vedic philosophy, there is not some dogmatic truth that we just accept. No, our Rishis have actually dissected this. They've thought about this problem in great detail, and they have arrived at the conclusion that anything that has space-time correlation, be it in the past, present, future, or for all past, present, and future, if it has a space-time correlation, even in one aspect, it is real. And that is why there is a famous definition of reality called Traikalika Nisheda Apratiyogitvam. Okay, so these are detailed philosophies that you can look at if you're interested, but that is the definition of reality. Okay. Now, all these fellows that I have cited so far, Brahman, Chaturmukha, Lakshmi, Jivas like us, rope, snake, flower, etc., they all have a purpose. That is the third most important criteria of reality, called Artha Kriya Karitva. Reality has the capacity to produce effects in the shape of realized ends. A rose, we can smell, we can make a garland. Rope, we can tie things, people, boats, etc. Snake can bite, can kill, can frighten, can be eaten, etc. But an illusory thing does not have Artha Kriya Karitva. Okay, you need to think about this. Three simple definitions, but these are the axiomatic truths of reality. A silver that appears to be superimposed on a conch shell cannot be used to make jewelry. Okay? An illusory silver cannot be made into jewelry. Bhadyam na artha kriyakari. So anything that is bhadya does not have artha kriyakaritva. Look at the snake. Okay, some philosophers think that snake actually, the illusion, the superimposition of a snake on a rope, some philosophers think that it has artha kriyakaritva, because I may think it is a snake and I may get frightened and I may have a heart attack and I might die. So in that situation, do you not accept that the snake does not have artha kriyakaritva? Okay, and our philosophers have actually looked at this problem. An illusionary snake cannot bite. An illusionary snake cannot spit venom. It cannot itself crawl and bite and kill. Although, because of our own defects in mental faculties, it is not about the snake that is really out there that is killing. It is only our mental faculties are defective, that we somehow got the false knowledge and we link this false knowledge with a knowledge of a real snake before. If, for example, there was a child who never has seen a snake before, did not have a prior knowledge of the snake, and did not know that the snakes are dangerous and they will bite and kill, that child will never get frightened going near the snake. So that prior knowledge is important. So some philosophers have forgotten these basic facts, but you can do your literature search. But even in this situation, bhadyam na artha kriyakari. So in realism, an object is either real or an illusion. There is no in-between or halfway house concepts. Okay? Everything in the universe is either sat or asat. That is it in the realistic schools of philosophy. So you may agree to it, you may accept this or not, but our friends in the monastic school have come up with a new concept. Okay? I'll explain to you what that means. Okay? In monastic philosophy, as what is called Mayavada or Advaita, they have actually given 3 levels of reality. Okay, so we need to understand this. Again, to understand any philosophies, we need to read all other philosophies and then do a comparative analysis. I'm sometimes disappointed when I hear my monastic friends doing discourses and so on. They never talk about these ideas. They never talk about what is their 3 levels of reality. They just say, oh, everything is the intermediate level and get on with it. But you actually need to go into it. And many folks are not doing it. And that's the reason why we have some folks have accepted this as dogmatic truth, which is unfortunate. What I will do is over the next 15 minutes, I'll try and explain to you what is it the 3 levels of reality that Mayavada is talking about. So, the axioms of Mayavada is anything that is existing in infinite space and infinite time, that is the only real. Okay? Anything that is eternal is the only reality. Okay? That is the first view there that you need to understand. Brahman is the only real because he exists in infinite space and he exists in infinite time. Okay? You and me, we may exist in infinite time, but we are finite in space. Our rose in the garden is finite in space and finite in time. Our pot is finite in time and finite in space. So the monastic philosophers think that these objects do not have the same level of reality as Brahman. So they have come up with a idea called, this is Anirvachaniya, this is Sadasad Vilakshana. So I'll spend some time talking about what that means. Okay. So they have said these objects are mithya. So that is the second level of reality. So there is one reality called Paramarthika Satya, and there is another level of reality called Vyavaharika Satya, which is also called Mithya. So in this equation, our Vishnu is Mithya or Saguna Brahman or Sabala Brahman, but he is actually Mithya. Our Chaturmukha Brahma is Mithya. Our Shri Tattva is Mithya. And all of us are Mithya. The rope, the snake, the rose, and the pot, they are all Mithya, that they have an intermediate reality. Okay. Then you have the third category called Asat. And this is interesting. The idea of asat in monastic philosophy is, the classic example that is given is something called Sasha Vishana. It is the rabbit, a hare having a horn that is nowhere seen in the universe. So that is asat. Okay, they don't think the snake that is superimposed on the rope as asat, or the silver superimposed on a conch shell as asat. But a horn, if a hare has a horn, that is asat because it is nowhere perceived in the universe. Okay, perception is an important idea. Okay, so this is a summary slide of views of reality, 3 levels of reality. Now, this asat is pratibhashika, and all others are vyavaharika, and Brahman is paramarthika. And this is where I find a little uncomfortable that they have defined this as a reality. How can asat be a reality? Pratibhashika and sat, they are contradictory terms. If something is asat, it cannot be sat. Yeah, so there are those issues. Then, of course, some of the monastic philosophers also try and give us lots of new definitions, I think, to confuse. So they have got sat, there is asat, there is sadasat, there is sadasat vilakshana, then there is sadasat vilakshana vilakshana. Panchama prakaraha, as described by Madhusudana Saraswati, okay, in Advaita Siddhi. Sadasad vilakshana, 5 levels of reality. Okay, God only help us, 5 levels of reality. My question is, we can hypothesize any concept. Why only have 3 or 5? Why not have 10, 15 or 20 levels of philosophy? Why should we restrict ourselves to 3 or 5? Or for that matter, like our Buddhist friends, don't have any reality, have it as 0. Yeah. So these are all the polemics, discussions. So what is it that I'm getting at? The proof of the pudding is in the eating. The monastic philosophers should provide the proof of the mithyatva of the universe to counter Vyasa's or Svayambu or Manu's view. Okay, I had to do all this to come to this point. We are all told the considered experience of humanity, 7-8 billion people in the world consider the world as real, where we are all suffering. Okay? To dismiss this state as mithya needs proof. Okay? That is not an unfair expectation from a philosophy. Yeah, they need to provide few proofs. So what is mithya? Okay? So a very brief recap. Okay, you have the material things, you have the non-material things. One view is, for material things, perception is superior to any agama. If, for example, I put my finger onto the fire and it burns, I have experienced the pain of a burnt finger. Now, if somebody says, oh, in Ishavasya Upanishad, there is a verse that says, if you put your finger on the fire, the experience that you get is not painful, you will reject it because you have experienced this. Yeah. So in material transactions, perception is upajivya. Okay? Whereas in non-material entities that we can't see, like jiva, brahman, karma, and so on, shastras become upajivya. So those are all some of the criteria some schools use. Upajivya, upajivaka, pramanya, prabalya. Okay, I don't want to again confuse you with all this, but the idea is go back to the slides and try and do your own reading. So coming back to Mayavada, world out there does not have a reality. It is all an imagination of the mind. And in fact, the classic definition, and again, sometimes I feel very disappointed because I'm so enthusiastic to listen to our monastic philosopher friends to talk about this. Because the definition of mithyatva of the universe, Mayavada says, Vimatam mithya drishyatvat jaratvat parichinnatvat. Advaita Siddhi. Okay? Ishta Siddhi, Advaita Siddhi works. They talk about this, that the universe is mithya because it is drishyatva. Drishyatva means it can be perceived. It is jaratva because it is inert. It is parichinnatva means because it is limited. Because of these reasons, the world is mithya. Okay? This is the fundamental definition. We may not be able to go through all these ideas over the next 10 minutes, but I'll run through some concepts here. Okay? On the other hand, what the realism, both of the East and the West think is, objects of true knowledge, they exist out there with space-time coordinates. Objects exist independently of the perceiving mind. Even if I am in deep sleep, Sudarshan, my car is still out there and parked outside. It is not that the car does not exist. The car is still outside. Okay. Objects always pre-exist perception. So this is this is the view of reality. Okay. Whereas you have the other view where they've said even the perception is false. Vimatam mitya drishyatvat. So let us look at what that drishyatvat means. So vimatam mitya drishyatvat edditam tattata yata sampratipannam. It is like this superimposition of a snake on a rope or a superimposition of a silver on a conch shell. That is the state of the universe. Okay. The controversial world is non-real as it has the objecthood of perception. That which is thus being endowed with the object of perception is thus non-real or mithya, just as the accepted illustration such as the superimposition of silver on a conch shell. Okay, so this is the position. Perception is not a source of true knowledge. Okay, have a think about this. You can read what that means. So I'm just going to say what it actually means. So this world is mithya. Okay, so we will go to the next slide. It's a brief overview of nitya. So in that equation, what it means here is the silver is mithya, the snake is mithya, it is a rope alone that exists, it is the conch shell alone that exists. So what is going on here? So in that definition, similarly, Brahman alone is real. The knowledge of Brahman is unsublated and hence Brahman is the only real. Hare's horn, flower in the sky are not objects of perception and hence they are called asat. Whereas the world is sadasat vilakshana or anirvachaniya or mithya or non-real. What does that mean? Silver is superimposed on the nacre. Silver is mithya because it is the object of perception. I'm seeing the silver, right? So says the monastic philosopher. Actually, he is not seeing the silver. He is seeing only the conch shell. His mind is twisted and his mind is not functioning properly. That point they have missed. But they say silver is mithya because it is an object of perception. Absolutely not. That silver does not exist in the space-time correlation. Okay. With the dawn of the knowledge of the conch shell, the silver disappears. Okay. Similarly, the snake is mithya because it is an object of perception. Absolutely not. The snake never existed there. It is an illusion. It is only my brain that is thinking that way. With the dawn of knowledge of rope, snake disappears. Similarly, the world, which is superimposed on Brahman, is an object of perception. With the dawn of knowledge of Brahman, world will disappear, similar to silver in nacre. Hence, the world is mithyam. That is the equation. Okay, you can accept this as a dogmatic truth, or you can critically analyze this. So here are the two easy points. But actually, there is no evidence to show that the world is sublated either now or at the time of in the future when I get Brahman knowledge. Can anybody ever in this earth who are the followers of monastic philosophy can actually give us the evidence that the world is actually sublated after the knowledge of Brahmatmaikya? Has it happened to anybody? If so, have they come back and told us, or has it? This is the polemics, okay? It's not my view, it's just a polemics. So has it actually been shown? Is there a proof? Absolute zero. No proof. Take it from me. If you can find a proof, I'll be very happy to get that proof. Actually, it is a hypothesis. There is no proof to it. Here is the next point. Silver and snake is not mithya. It is asat. It is an illusion. It is not mithya. It is an illusion. It is just a different type of coining the word asat to mithya. Asat, it's something about temporal. If something disappears, now the monastic philosophers say it is asat. But if it disappears at the dawn of knowledge, which could be some millions of births from now, then that is mithya. No, but sat is asat. It doesn't matter when it goes. It is asat. Actually, it has no time-space correlation. So it is actually asat. The snake and the silver is asat. They actually did not exist there. So there is problem with the illustration that is being used to actually come up with a philosophy. Okay? If you're going to prove a hypothesis, your experiment should be spot on. It should be without defects. It should be without any problems. So that is what I would do when I run my research laboratory. If I have a hypothesis, I do an experiment, I need to be absolutely sure that these experiments actually prove the hypothesis. But actually here, the experiment of silver on nacre, the rope on the snake, actually does not prove it because they are illusions. They are not actually mithya. So these are all the polemics from the realistic schools. Here is another big problem that no monistic philosopher actually thinks about this world. There are 14 defects in the syllogism of Advaita. Ashraya siddhaha, aprasiddha visheshana, siddha sadhanata, amse siddha sadhanata, apasiddhanta. Asiddha for hetu, viruddha, anaikantika, anadyavasita, bhadya, prakarana sama, satprakarsha, sadhya vikalo drishtantaha, sadhana vikalashta upadihi. So this is the beauty of, again, I come back to Vedic philosophy. You cannot say something and then run away. You have to prove it. And what the other philosophers from the other side is, they've actually dissected out the 5 components of syllogism. Logic has got 5 components. And every component, pratigna, hetu, vyapti, drishtanta, udaharana, niyamana, they all have. This is why it is beautiful Vedic philosophy. They have dissected these ideas out, and what comes out from these analysis is vimatam mithya drishyatvad shukti rajatavat has got 14 defects. Okay? In fact, certain schools of Vedanta use this syllogism to learn what are all the defects that can be in any logic. So this is an example of a defective logic. Not actually a logic that proves the mithyatva of the world, say the realistic philosophers. So I hope that makes sense. And finally, the idea of dreams, because I told you about dreams, isn't it? They said this Brahman is dreaming, and that is why this universe has come about. Dream objects don't exist, but we appear to perceive them in dreams, just like snake silver illustration. That is another example. That is far from the truth. Dreams, who said dreams are unreal? Dreams are as real as how we see things in Jagrati Avastha, except that linking what we see in the Jagrati Avastha with the objects as we see in the Swapna Avastha, that is our mistake. But the objects of dream are very, very real in realistic schools of Vedanta. What are the material cause of the dreams? Vasanas are impressions of previous experiences in the mind. Nobody can defend this. These are all the neural circuits from past experience that have gone into the mind. This is the material cause of dreams, say the realistic philosophers. Who is the efficient cause who actually brings forth the dream? It is the Supreme Brahman who brings forth the dream. Sandesh Srishti Rahahi. Vedavyasa has done a sutra to discuss this about the reality of dreams. And I'm really amused how certain folks can forget all this. Dreams have a time-space correlation. What is that time-space correlation? I'm sleeping at night, time, space. Where is it happening? In my brain and mind. What is going on? Chemical and electrical activity of the brain, which is a material interaction that is going on. Okay. Suchakashchahi shruter achakshate cha tadvidihi Vedavyasa. Okay. Dream is absolutely real. It is not mithya. So this example also falls to the ground to prove the mithyatva of the world. Dreams are very real because now we know with all the neurochemistry and everything, that dream is very real. And I also want to illustrate, and I love this illustration of Srinivasa Ramanujan, the greatest mathematician who was always there. And he said his inspirations and mathematical solutions came through dreams. That Namakkal Amman actually told him that this is the solution for your equation. That is what he says. Okay. So again, what I'm trying to say is dreams have a Arthakriya Karitva, that they can actually have a realized ends also. So if you take all the 3 criteria, dreams are also real. And that is exactly what our Mandukya Upanishad says, isn't it? Swapnasthanaha, antah prajnaha, shaptangaha, ekona vimshati mukaha, pravivikta buk, tejaso dvitiyaha padaha. We have done all this very, very in detail. So I've told you these various problems, some problems of illustrations used in the monastic philosophy. And I was thinking about this morning, and I thought this is quite amusing. So the first illustration is of the snake superimposed on the rope. This is taking an example of an asat or an illusion to prove mithya. The second one, silver superimposed on a conch shell. This is taking an example of an asat to prove the concept of mithya. Then the dream. Our monastic friends are actually taking an example of a sat to prove mithya. Yeah. Nowhere in these examples they are able to prove the existence of mithyatva of the world. Okay. This is the monastic polemics about how can, when Svayambu or Manu says yata tatyato artan vedadat shashvatipyaha samabhyaha, you can come up with a view. You can also go against Vedavyasa, who has said, janmadhyasya etaha, and then so no, this world, the created world is an illusion or a maya or a mithya. When Vedavyasa has said, this is a real creation. Unless it's a real creation, how are you going to celebrate this Paramatma as Sarvajna? You can't say this Paramatma is great, but his creation is false. That means you're accusing Brahman. You're actually accusing Brahman of deceiving you or doing lies. You're actually bringing down the greatness of Brahman. That is the core view there. By saying this world is mithya, you're not glorifying Paramatma. You've actually brought him down. So says the realistic philosophy. So at this point, our monastic philosophers will say, no. Pratyaksha and Anumana may not be able to tell us the reality, the mithyatva of the world. But Vedas themselves describe the mithyatva of the universe and they cite Nasadiya Sukta. Nasadasin no sadasit tadanim nasi rajo no vyoma aparo yat, and goes on. Remember these two words, tadekam tama asid. So the monastic view there is, the tamas before creation, tama asid, the tamas existed. And what was the nature of that tamas? Na sat, na asat. But they've forgotten, in middle there is another word there called tadekam. By actually saying this tamas as sadasad vilakshana, they are also saying that tadekam, which is Brahman, is also sadasad vilakshana. So all these nuances of interpretation, they've forgotten. Okay? But if you say that this Nasadiya Sukta also proves the mithyatva of the world, but then this is not a Niravakasha Shruti, it is a Savakasha Shruti, which means there are other ways of interpreting this Shruti. It is not like Dva Suparna Sayuja Sakaya Samana Vriksham Parishashvajate Tayor Anyaha Pippalaswadati. That is a Niravakasha Shruti. You cannot make any other interpretation of that. Whereas this one you can, because the word Sat and Asat has got hundreds of meanings in Sanskrit. One meaning is Sat is Murta, Asat is Amurta, which means the manifested, the Tejas, Ap and Annam was not there. Akasha and Vayu is Amurta, which was not there before creation, which means everything was in the unmanifested state as Mula Prakriti. That is what that means. That Mula Prakriti is Tama Asi. Yeah, so the interpretations change. So as I said, the problems of even picking Nasadiya Sukta, the realistic philosophers will say, but that would mean Brahman also becomes Salasad Vilakshana. And how can you say this? And this is a Savakasha Shruti. There are other views on this. Okay? So these are all the polemics. Now, if I had gone a little longer, I really would like to apologize here because we did a lot of deep, hardcore philosophy here to illustrate the points as to my own humble request here is, please let us not accept anything as dogmatic truths. Just because some guy said this, it is not the truth. We need to do our own inquiry and vichara before we understand. Now, the idea of the creatorship of the universe is an upasana of Brahman. We can't just dismiss it and say this although it is an upasana of Brahman, this creation is mithya. Is it feasible? Or can we accept this creatorship of the universe as Satya? Because we are all here in this world. We are all going through suffering. Every family has its own individual tragedies. Nobody is without this. Are we all going to say this is all mithya, so let us not worry about it? No. We have to accept that this is real and try and find a solution for this rather than run away from the problem and say this is all a mithya, so why take it seriously? That is not how philosophy progresses. Because that is what Svayambu Manu is actually saying in the next 6 verses. Why is this relevant or important to understand? Because there are consequences to wrong upasana. Andattamaha pravishanti ye avidyam upasate tato bhuya ivate tamo yavu vidyaya rataha. Anyadeva ahur anyadeva ahur vidyaya anyadeva ahur avidyaya iti shushru madiranam yenastad vichachakshire vidyam cha avidyam cha yastad veda ubayam saha avidyaya mrityum tirtva vidyaya amrutam ashnute. These are all such profound words of philosophy from Svayambu or Manu over the next 6 verses. So the reason why I had gone through this is to link that creatorship and to the next verse to see how important it is for our upasana and individual journey to actually understand what is true knowledge, what is false knowledge, and of course, that understanding and discrimination of true and false knowledge is based on individual capacities and jiva swabhava. That nobody can change. But what we can change is if our swabhava is such that when we are actually seeking true knowledge, then we should make our individual efforts to go and understand these philosophies and then see what appeals to us and then make progress. Okay. So what we will do in the next class is go through what are the consequences that Svayambu or Manu is talking about. It's really beautiful. It talks about paravidya, aparavidya, what is true knowledge, what is false knowledge, and everything else. So we will deal with it in the next class. And there was lots of information today. So go back and have a look at it. And maybe we can pick up some questions in either today or in subsequent sessions. So on that note, I'm going to close. Krishna Pranamast. Any questions? We can take it up or we can pick it up next week because I know I was about 5 minutes over time. Excellent. So looks like there is no question. So Sudarshan, can I ask you to recite Om and we'll close today's session?
Sure. Yeah. Om.
So excellent. Hare Krishna, everyone. We'll catch up next week. We thought we'll do Gita Chintana next week, but it's actually been postponed to the following week, chapter 18. Suresh Kankanwadi ji is going to take us through chapter 18. Okay, so we'll catch up for the next few verses of Isha Upanishad next week. Take care and stay safe. Hare Krishna.
Hare
Hare
Krishna.
Krishna.
Wonderful
Thank
session
you.
and very high fun stuff as well. Thank you. Thank you, Madhu.